Ibrahim from the Centre for Kurdish Progress has asked me to chair initially, and then I suspect this will be a rather free-flowing meeting. We've got a number of MP colleagues here on the line. I think Ibrahim has been introducing them as they come in, as well as, of course, from the Lords. I think Lord Glassman and and I think maybe others as well. So it's a good little turnout now, and I see also I can see Gary Kent as well here. So I think what we wanted to do, first of all, I introduce myself. My name's Lloyd Russell-Moyle. I'm the MP for Brighton Kemp Town, and of course we have met a number of times in Kurdistan itself, as well as now online. And so I'm very pleased to have you here with us. I think what we wanted to talk about was some of the inter-Kurdish tensions that maybe are happening at the moment, and the potential spillover effect that that has with both neighbouring regions, and any of the the concern that it has for the region, the KRG itself. So I think that that's why we wanted to maybe hear from yourself, hear from the representative of the KRG in the UK about these issues, and then maybe ask some questions and comments ourselves, if that is okay. I wondered before, the other non-MP on the call is Simon Dubbins, who I know you've met with us a number of times. And Simon, you were going to just briefly outline some of the issues that have come to your attention to help set the scene. Simon. You have to unmute, Simon.
Yeah, sorry about that.
This is the perennial problem with Zoom, isn't it?
I thought we'd got past that, but here we are. Thanks very much, Lloyd, and thanks very much indeed, Mr. Dizayee, for agreeing to meet us with your colleagues. I don't know if you remember, but we have met, I think, on 3 occasions now. I've had the pleasure of meeting with you and colleagues in Erbil. So the meeting is extremely timely. You appreciate my own organisation, with many other unions and civil society, have been through the years very engaged with Kurdish solidarity throughout the parts of Kurdistan across the board. So we've really concerned about the current situation and what we've been hearing. I guess our real concern is that for us, the KRG area is a bit of an island and a beacon of stability, or it certainly has been in recent times. And we've been impressed with a lot of the progress that has been made on gender issues, on economic issues generally, and just the way the region has developed. So when we have been receiving the reports about the really, dangerous spiking tensions, particularly around areas such as Mount Gare, and where we understand there have been some clashes and standoffs, what we are really worried about, Mr. Dizayee, is that at a time when there's a big change going on, we've got a Biden presidency, and we're very hopeful that we may see a much better line in regard to the Kurdish region, and indeed in terms of curbing some of the Turkish aggression that we've seen throughout the region. The absolute last thing that we want to see from outside is inter-Kurdish tensions exploding or getting to the dangerous point that they are at. So really, we wanted to obviously hear from you about what the current situation is, and just as friends of the Kurdish people, relay to you our really deep found fears that this is going in the wrong direction at the moment, and to see what can possibly be done at all, or how we can at all assist and give support to any moves about de-escalating those tensions and trying to get things back on track. I think that's enough from me by way of opening comments, Lloyd. Thanks.
Look, I guess that's from our side. I want to introduce, of course, the main guest for colleagues who don't know. Mr. Stefan Dizayee serves as the top diplomat for the Kurdistan regional government in the 9th cabinet, after being named as the head of the Department for Foreign Relations in July 2019. I think we visited you very shortly after that appointment, if I remember, and that was a delightful visit. But your previous experience, of course, is very important as well. You were the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, as well as the spokesperson and Head of Department for Media and Informations on the 7th and 8th Cabinet. So you are an experienced member, but you're also a good friend to us. And have always been very generous with your time. And so we really appreciate that. I think that is something that's so important for continuing relations. And so I wonder if it is appropriate to hand over immediately to you to say a few words about the situation, and then to bring in afterwards, of course, Carwyn, the representative of the KRG in the UK, but I don't want to further delay with introductions, and I suspect you can do a better job than ever I could in introducing yourself. Oh, and also for colleagues, just there might be moments of photos to be taken by the Centre for Kurdish Progress of the Zoom call taking place, if that is okay for colleagues. Just so you know, your screen's on, that might mean your photos included. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for the indeed the timely gathering, and thanks for Kurdish Progress and all the honourable MPs and other colleagues who are here, and also to Carwyn from the KRG rep in London. It's the wonder of modern technology that brings us together from different parts of the world. However, human interaction or human touch is always important. Hopefully in near future, we will be able to visit you in UK, or you can visit us here, so we can have a roundtable gathering face-to-face and in a friendly atmosphere. I think it is very important to the topics that you raised. But if you allow me, I don't know how we're doing for time. But if you allow me, I will just go over a panorama of some events which may have an impact on the issues that we will be coming to, the key issues. First and foremost, we have to understand the present status of Kurdistan region has not always been like this. And you all know that the calamities and the problems that the people of Kurdistan have endured since the foundation of the modern state of Iraq 100 years ago. So there has been numerous upheavals, and there has been numerous, let's say, Kurdish rebellions against the central authorities until this very day in a different form and way. But the reasons are one too many, because the Kurdish people and other components, Chaldeans, Assyrians, Turkmens, were totally disregarded in the new structure of the modern state of Iraq. And we have seen, the genocide of Anfal and the chemical attacks and destruction of thousands of communities. So against that background, the people of Kurdistan has always had this anxiety and this concern for their future and the guarantees that should be provided. And we feel that the first stage of that in 1991, when after the eviction of the Iraqi army from Kuwait, the Shiites in the south and the Kurds in the north sought an opportunity. Probably they misinterpreted the message coming from Washington that the people of Iraq should take matters into their own hands, and they did, but unfortunately there was no support for it. The rebellion in the south was crushed, and the people of Kurdistan remembered only 3 years earlier the chemical attack on Halabja. That's why, against that fear, they fled to the mountains. We had the exodus of the 2 million on the mountains of Turkey and Iran. And that was when the plight of the Kurds were highlighted and internationalized for the first time, but through humanitarian perspective. When Security Council Resolution 688 was passed, no-fly zone, and the time which was, I would probably say, championed by former Prime Minister Major and the late President of France, Mitterrand, safe haven, provide comfort, 36 parallel was established. From that, the Kurds and the political leadership of Kurdistan, who were preaching democracy and all aspects of a free society, they had a golden opportunity to go for elections of 1992. And unfortunately, with little experience in self-administration and practice of democracy, we faced many obstacles, including internal conflicts for a good number of years in mid-90s. Luckily, we managed to overcome that. And most of the Iraqi opposition groups, the liberal movements, the democratic movements, were all based in Kurdistan, including some of the religious groups, Shiites and Sunnis. Came 2003, where the Kurdish leaders were convinced by our Western friends, led by the United States, that there will be a new Iraq, it will be a federal Iraq. And we pushed for a federal Iraq because under the autonomous agreement we had of 1970, all the calamities had befallen on the people of Kurdistan. So we felt a new system in Iraq is necessary in order to guarantee the future of the people of Kurdistan. This is why we pushed for federalism, democracy, and the principle of consensus, where key issues for the future of Iraq will be decided by upon consensus. The first few years, it went well because we had key leaders, people like late Jalal Talabani, Masoud Barzani, and many other key leaders went to Baghdad. And at times when there were conflict between Shiites and Sunnis in the streets of Baghdad, Peshmerga forces were sent to Baghdad in order to separate them. So the Kurds for a good while were the kingmakers. But unfortunately, as we went by on the referendum of 2005, which we felt for the constitution, would be the guarantee for the future of every individual, every component in Iraq. But as we went by, we felt that the situation is moving more into a totalitarian and authoritarian regime, and by sidelining the Kurds, by totally disregarding the Sunnis, who were, most of them had boycotted, or most of their leaders had fled the country. And that somewhat sent alarm bells into the whole political scene. And in 2014, beginning of 2014, the former Prime Minister, Mr. Maliki, without any reason whatsoever, cut the budget from Kurdistan. And only a few months later, ISIS onslaught began, and a third of Iraqi territory fell into the hands of ISIS. And it is still an enigma. When ISIS was on the doors of Baghdad, all of a sudden they stopped their attack on Baghdad. They redirected their attention to Kurdistan, and they were only 25 kilometers away from Erbil city center. That's when our allied friends helped us with the air coverage, and later with training and armament and so on, because under the Iraqi constitution, Baghdad was responsible to arm Peshmergas, train Peshmergas, but none of that what happened. So the Peshmergas were lightly armed, and they were not able to put up resistance to all the hardware of the modern US technology and warfare and armament that had fallen into the hands of ISIS. In any case, the mode of defense became more of a mode of offense from Peshmergas, and soon we managed to recover much of the land, and including to help with the liberation of Mosul. But of course, this didn't happen so suddenly. And we had, in a matter of 6 months, there was a population increase by 29%. People from Sinjar, from Nineveh Plain, and Mosul, Salahuddin, and Tikrit, and Anbar, all fled to Kurdistan. Almost 2 million people came to Kurdistan. This at a cost of $1.4 billion annually to the KRG in hidden costs: health, education, water, sanitation, security, infrastructure, all of that. And unfortunately, we were already in economical crisis. Baghdad was not helping out. We had 1,000 kilometers of front line with ISIS. and oil prices dropped by, from $100 down to $25. So all of these problems came together, and it put the KRG in the extremely difficult situation. On the military side, we are grateful to our Western friends who helped us with training, with armament, with advice, but unfortunately, on the economical side, we are still continuing to suffer. Now, of course, as I said, we were becoming rather concerned because at a time when we felt that we are true partners in Baghdad, more and more things were not going the right way. And the Sunnis were totally sidelined, they were pushed aside, and then it turned to the Kurds to be also to be somewhat forced to disengage. At one time when we had a large portion in the parliament and also in the cabinet, and many key positions in the army, in other government institutions became vacant, and they were not allowed to be filled in by the Kurds. So we felt that we are no longer being considered as true partners. And that's why the Kurdish leadership felt that under the current circumstances, it's extremely difficult to continue like this because it's become a sectarian rule in Baghdad. And within that sectarian, only a specific group or ideology is becoming a prevailing force. And that's why it led to the decision in June of 2017 to go for the referendum in September of 2017. We had 3 months, 3 good months for our friends to tell us, look, they don't agree with that. But it was middle of September when people started to panic and they knew that we are serious when the genie was out of the bottle. It was impossible to retreat from that position. The idea of the referendum was basically to say, look, the people of Kurdistan want this, but it doesn't mean that the next day we will declare independency, because at times when the political leaders were talking to Baghdad about their future, they were always saying that, well, this is PUK's idea or this is KDP's idea. We want to hear from the people of Kurdistan. And the people of Kurdistan, with 93% vote, yes, actually expressed their willingness and desire. Nevertheless, things didn't go that well. And there was an embargo from Baghdad on us, aerial embargo, land embargo from Iran. The only country with a lot of rhetoric, with a lot of saber rattling was Turkey, but in practical terms, they did not close their border and they did not shut down the oil pipeline. Otherwise, we would have been in a far more difficult situation. Now, coming back on the issue of post-referendum, however, we managed to rebuild the situation and kiss and make up with Baghdad, with the government of Adel Abdel Mahdi. Last year, when the cabinet was formed here on the 10th of July, on the 16th of July, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and several ministers went to Baghdad, and they managed to come to some arrangement on several key issues like revenue sharing, oil, and many other issues. And unfortunately, that was not delivered because the government of Dr. Adel Abdel Mahdi faced protesters in October of last year, and subsequently he resigned. So the new government has been formed by Mr. Kazemi. Again, we had to start from zero. And again, we managed to come to some understanding, but unfortunately, not much of that has been delivered. It's not that Mr. Kazemi is not sincere in his approach, but we feel that his hands are tied, and we've seen the scenes in the parliament and even the draft budgetary law that was sent by the government to the parliament, it was totally changed. So they are putting more load on the government. In any case, we are trying to continue with our dialogue. We have currently we have a delegation in Baghdad. We have reached some security arrangements with Baghdad to at least cooperate in the disputed territories where there's a gap between the Iraqi army and the Peshmergas, and that gap is being taken advantage of by the ISIS, and they have regrouped themselves, and they are trying, or they have been able to reestablish themselves. And also we have reached early October, we reached an agreement with Baghdad on Shingal. The fact that the idea is to have a local force from the local community, a local police force to protect their own region. If need be, Federal Army and Peshmergas will support if and when needed. In addition to that, a new mayor to be elected, and the promises that we have from our Western friends to help with the rebuilding of Shingal. With the rebuilding of Shingal means return of IDPs. There are over 350,000 people from that region still living in camps. So once these people go back and once the rebuilding starts, it means security, stability, and job opportunities. If and when that project is implemented, that means it can be a successful, let's say, project or framework for other areas like Nineveh Plain for the Christians and Kirkuk and other areas. But unfortunately, the very day when this idea was, or this project was announced and signed between Erbil and Baghdad, federal government and regional government, there were voices who were not very happy with that. And the voices who were not happy were very vocal, and because it was undermining their presence, it was undermining their interest, including in Nineveh Plain. There was no project for Nineveh Plain, but people there or those local militia forces knew too well if there is a success in Shingal, the same can be applied to Nineveh and there will be no room for them. So they stood against this project. And even the splinter groups of PKK in Shingal, they were against it. They were saying that they're not consulted. I mean, you cannot knock on every door to say, well, it's not a referendum. It's an agreement between two authorities to reestablish law and order and bring back peace and stability and prosperity to that region. But unfortunately, it has faced some opposition. So it hasn't been implemented as yet, even though some federal police has been sent there despite the agreement, because we did not agree on federal police, because we believe that federal police is not much of a difference from some of the other forces locally present there. It was the regular army plus a local police force to be established. Then it comes to the issue of the spillover of the conflict that was mentioned, and I think one of the key concerns that has been tabled. First, we have to ask what is the root cause of this problem. Kurdistan region of Iraq, geographically, politically, legally, is part of Iraq. And whether the Kurds like this or not, this was something that our friends in the West, Sykes-Picot, mapped it out. So it wasn't the will of the people of Kurdistan. So you have Turkey, you have Syria, you have Iran, and you have Iraq. It's a fact. And we in Kurdistan of Iraq have been pragmatic to deal with this reality, to not to move with emotion, but to be more of a pragmatic, let's say, leaders or politicians that we have. Nevertheless, we always have affinity for our brethren in all other parts, and we have supported their democratic and all the rights that they should have in those countries, be it Turkey, Syria, or in Iran. However, when you have a group such as PKK operating or used to operate inside Turkey and will spill over into Iraqi Kurdistan and operating or using this territory as a springboard, operating inside Turkey, where there were clashes, and during clashes, people do get killed. Under normal international law, this is not a normal practice to allow your territory to be used against your neighbors. That means you are declaring war on your neighbor. And we are not in any position to declare war on anybody, let alone the neighbors that we have. So the PKK's presence in Kurdistan, if you look at it for the last perhaps 20 years, from late 90s, if we can consider it, they kept a low profile. And at one point, our leaders helped with the peace process in Turkey. And it did reach certain positive points. But over the last year or so, a couple of years, for example, when we had to withdraw some of our Peshmergas from the mountains to fight ISIS in the front line, unfortunately, PKK took advantage of that. And they took the positions of Peshmergas and more getting closer to the communities. And some of these communities were not able to go back to their farms. And there are tens, if not hundreds, of villages have been evacuated because of the close proximity of PKK and subsequent Turkish operations. So really, the question has to be asked, where does PKK stand, and what is the area, or where is the area that PKK should be operating? Within Turkey in recent years, I believe to a large degree, the threat of PKK against the state of Turkey has been contained. So it's mostly here. Now, whether Turkey without PKK would still operate in these areas, I think it's a hypothetical question. But today, Turkey says that, well, PKK is there. If you, Iraq, the federal government and the regional government cannot control it, then it's my obligation to do it. So PKK has given a pretext for Turkish operation in that area, and that has increased more recently. So really, what they had in the mountain of Gara, which is near Duhok. I mean, what does bring PKK to Mount Gara? Or Kirkuk, for example, which is 300 kilometers away from Turkish border, or places like Karadağ or Kelar and Kifri, and areas close to Slemania, or even close to Zaho. So really, the question has to be asked. It's not the case of the tension that we have created or escalation. Basically, we are saying that Kurdistan regional government and the parliament is an elected one, it's a legal one, it represents the people of Kurdistan of Iraq, full stop. And if PKK is trying to introduce itself as an alternative to this authority, well, this cannot be accepted, for sure. Even changing some mountain names. Now, PKK has supposedly, in Kandil area, calls the liberated media region. Liberated from whom? Or liberated Zap region. Some of the mountains' names have been changed. Some of the local villages' names have been changed. I mean, to what right and to what jurisdiction they give themselves this right to do so? And to be honest, we are against any escalation of any tension. We certainly do not want any form of confrontation, for sure. I think the people of Kurdistan have had enough of that in the 90s, in recently against Daesh, and still people are homeless. There are still 1.1 million IDPs living in Kurdistan. So I think we need to concentrate on rebuilding our country, and we really need to reconcile. But if this threat continues, and if this kind of presence continues, naturally it leads to some tension. And I think that tension needs to be removed. And much of that, I think the answer is with Kandil. And the same applies to the Rojava. I mean, the Kurds of Syria, unfortunately, they have had probably a far more difficult situation than anyone, because they were not even entitled to any form of identity or citizenship. In the 60s and 70s, they were subject to Hizam al-Arabi, or the Arab Belt, where the Kurdish communities were removed, and along the border with Turkey and the border with Iraq, and Arab tribes were settled in there. So demographic change was applied like it was here in Iraqi Kurdistan. So by meddling in the affairs of the Syrian Kurds, again, that has put them at a great deal of risk. Hence, we have seen the Turkish intervention. So we hope that the escalation, there will be a de-escalation, and we hope that PKK acts more rationally and recognize and respect the achievements of the people of Kurdistan of Iraq and the elected government and the elected parliament, and stop meddling in the affairs of this region.
Thank you.
I think I've said a lot.
Yes, I think that's been really helpful. And I guess all of our concerns are always about how we can support peace and stability in the region. Of course, within the region that the Kurdish regional government look after, but the wider region as well, because it is in no one's interest for escalation. You're quite right about that, but that doesn't mean that you need to allow one side to run over the other, if that makes sense. And particularly, I think you've outlined that very clearly. But the question, I guess, for us is, how can we help support you to make sure that this doesn't escalate and that Turkey doesn't do offensives, but equally that they don't drive a wedge between Kurdish people that's either, kind of, and all those considerations are important. I wonder if, I know Carwyn is on the call. Did you want to add anything, Carwyn? And then I'll open it up to the floor to MPs. I know we've got a number of MPs here, including that might want to speak. Carwyn Tahir is the Kurdish Regional Government's representative in the UK. And so if MPs, if you've not met him, and I've met him many times and always appreciate our discussions, I would always urge you, when we are able to sit down and have a coffee, because he's a very good representative.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I have, if I get 2-3 minutes, so I can just update you with the year of the event in Kurdistan region in 2020. So good morning to all of you and good afternoon to our colleagues in Kurdistan region. I'm glad to see many of my good friends, the MPs and peers across parties. Thanks for attending the meeting, and thanks to Kurdish Progress, and grateful that I've been given this opportunity. And my special thanks to Minister Safeen and his colleague that troubled themselves to actually join us or being with us despite being a weekend at their end. I'm not going to say much, as we have heard from Minister Safeen, who eloquently updated you all and gave you a deep panorama of the event and on very pressing issues that brought us to today's status quo. And I hope he cleared some illusion over the issues of intra-Kurdish conflict that I'm sure you're all concerned about. But let me begin with a few remarks. And as a reminder to all, I would say that our year 2020 sadly began with deteriorated political event in Iraq. On one side, the raised tension between Iran and United States that reached to the highest point, resulting in the killing of United States long adversary Qasem Soleimani on Iraq soil, followed by ambiguity and retaliation from Iran. And on the other side, the political disorder in Iraq itself as a result of the continued demonstration for more than a year now, demanding reform, services, job opportunities, and political reform. Also, the increase of Turkish incursion in Syrian Kurdistan and Kurdistan regions territory, which caused more security and stability concern in the region. Then the emerge of COVID-19 that has created new challenges, not only affected the world health worldwide, but also hugely damaged the economy. And for us in Kurdistan region, had a multi shocks as a result of that. This is all added to the existing political and economic challenges, which remains an immense challenges. And unfortunately, this is also topped up by the latest skirmishes between federal government and Kurdistan regional government over the deficit law, which is unjust, and one can sense of discrimination between the nation in Iraq, and namely against the Kurdish nation within Iraq, as they have excluded civil servant in Kurdistan region from the national borrowing to pay the salaries. All these challenges in Iraq constitute a direct impact on stability in the region and the Middle East, as it is evident that every state in the Middle East contribute to the overall security and stability, contrary it will pose a threat if the government doesn't operate reasonably. Regional and international stability is crucial for Iraq to place a great deal of importance to it. To change the status quo and to avoid the collapse in Iraq. For that, Iraq has to get its policy right and institutionalize the government structure and strengthen that, and that would reduce the vulnerability and exposure to shocks and influences in Iraq as a whole. This is also vital for Iraq and Kurdistan region to balance the bilateral and multilateral relationship and form a positive relation with neighboring countries based on mutual interest and respect of sovereignty. The main reason for the security instability in Iraq are the lack of sovereignty. Therefore, Iraq has to be bold when it comes to sovereignty, and they have to address these challenges meaningfully. Internal instability is also of concern. Despite the forcible incorporation of nations in Iraq a century ago, as Minister Safeen alluded to it, still Iraq has problem with its formation, which consists of different components of nation and sects that hasn't been able to merge on the basis of equality and power sharing as yet. So I think Iraq has failed to accept the composition of society and living together in cohesion and peace. However, my governments of Kurdistan region are determined, and our priority is improve relation with the federal government in Baghdad based on the provisions of Iraq's constitution. International community support is indeed essential for us, and to achieve that we are blessed that we have good friends globally, and particularly like yourself in the United Kingdom. And we're also grateful that there is an all-party parliamentary group on Kurdistan region who plays a crucial and instrumental role for long-standing with Kurdistan region. The government and its, with Kurdistan region and the government and its people in raising awareness in both House of Commons and Lord. On Kurdish cause and questions about the Kurdish cause, promoting broader relations between our two nations at various levels. Thank you to many of you being part of APPG and being part of APPG delegation to Kurdistan region several times. And it gives me a pleasure to conclude by staying despite all these stalemates throughout the year 2020, but we at least ending the year with some positive point that is good news to all. The emergence of vaccine, and we hope that the world would be safe and life returns to its normality. And we also concluded the year by a positive Kurdistan Economic Forum that took place virtually or remotely from London last week. And more importantly, the very productive visit by Minister of State for Middle East, James Cleverly, and Armed Force Minister, again, James Heapy, to Kurdistan region, which I'm sure Minister Safeen will update us on that, because we see that it was a very important visit that took place. Thank you so much again for hosting us, and thank you for giving me opportunity. And back to you, Lloyd. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Look, I've got a few questions and comments that people want to come in. I want to bring them in. I know Chris Stevens' office posted a question. I'll just read that out, then I'll go to two of the other people who are wanting to come in, and then see if there are responses there. Chris Stevens' office, Chris Stevens is an SNP MP, asks there has been an uprising / protest, I think protest more, in Soleimania, and I'm sure that there will be others today or tomorrow, that people are unhappy about not the financial support not being given enough to them. You've mentioned some of that financial support. People say that they are struggling. What's the strategy for supporting the public financially so that those tensions are reduced? So that's what their office was asking. I've now got Angus McNeil, who wanted to come in. Angus is SNP member, Scottish National member, but more importantly, from my perspective, because he's my chairman, he is the chair of the International Trade Committee in the UK Parliament. And of course, this is a relatively new area of work and a new committee for the UK, because we've left the European Union and have now an independent trade policy. And so Angus is in charge of scrutinising and reviewing those trade deals and trade relations going forward, with a hopefully capable set of colleagues in his team. Not to suggest anything about my capability. Angus.
Thanks, Lloyd. Actually, you're doing such a very good job here today that I'm getting worried for my own job on the International Trade Committee. You're more than capable. No, it's just a general question. I mean, I've heard a lot of the detail that and colleagues have, and I know there's quite a support for Kurdistan in Scotland, and certainly, as mentioned, in the SNP. In fact, one of the a young Kurdish woman of Kurdish background was trying to stand for the Scottish Parliament, and is certainly active in politics in Scotland. But that sort of makes me think a little bit. I mean, I often hear, I'm no expert on what happens in and around Kurdistan. I do meet a lot of Kurds in Glasgow in particular when I'm there. Isn't one of the solutions for Kurdistan truly independence, or is that completely off the radar screen? Because when our speaker was speaking, he talked about being very practical rather than emotional, I think was maybe the term he used. And is that dealing with practicality, is that what leaves the idea of independence far away? Just you realize the real politique run about you and the difficulty, but is it still an aspiration? I'd assume it was. I do know that there are difficulties when you've got Turkey, Syria and Iraq, particularly with Turkey around you. Just a little view on that, if you don't mind, just basically for background I probably should be more aware of. Thank you, Lloyd. And sorry, my question was longer than your questions ever are, Lloyd, when I went down to you.
That's not true. Simon.
Thanks, Lloyd. Look, it's just to really come back on some of the other comments that were made there. I think everybody really appreciates that the region is unbelievably complicated and unstable and difficult, and nobody is underestimating that for a moment. But look, just two very clear points, if I may say, Mr. Dizayee. With regard to the Shengal situation, everyone is also aware that there was a genocide in 2014, and hundreds of thousands of people fled, thousands were killed, thousands of women were dragged into slavery and so on. And the KRG absolutely provided hospitality and should rightly be proud of that. But there is also a very real concern, which I think is a legitimate one on the part of the Yazidi population. And they clearly is a good part of the population where their own self-defense units played a very important role in their defense. I think it's also widely publicized that PKK units also assisted with that in defending a civilian population. So I think from their point of view, it's understandable. And I don't want to go over the history. We know there's a complicated history about the role that other forces did or didn't play at that moment. But I think there's an absolute understandable right that they want to have a voice and a say in what happens to their area, and not that it's simply decided upon by central Baghdad or simply the KRG central government. So I really would urge you to take that into account, because that is how it appears from outside. particularly if that's part of the escalating tensions now. But the real issue is this. To the wider world at the moment, Turkey is actually becoming something of a pariah state. That is the reality. The tensions with the French government are enormous, as I'm sure you're very well aware. There's deep concern about what's going on in Libya, the problems in Nagorno-Karabakh in the involvement of the Turkish government, but most front and center, the Kurdish people should never forget what happened at Kobani. And I think there's a deep, deep fear and a resentment within the Kurdish population in northeast Syria, particularly when the Turkish government was very clearly, according to the evidence, allowing and supporting jihadi groups to do the ethnic cleansing. Turkey then invaded, as you're well aware, in 2019 and ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of Kurds again, many of whom came to the KRG for protection and shelter. So what we're really trying to stress here is if the Turkish government is putting pressure on the KRG to take acts that it is not necessarily wanting to do off its own back, we would plead loud and clear, please don't go down that direction. Please seek to de-escalate the tensions. We are hopeful that the American administration also sees some of the recent Turkish actions as a real problem, and that there will be a much stiffer line coming out of them in relation to that. What we want to see, well, the last thing we want to see is more divisions amongst the Kurds. The Kurds should settle their differences themselves, amongst themselves, and absolutely under no circumstances allow external forces with different agendas to try and cause further divisions and further problems. So I really just wanted to convey that to you very directly, and I appreciate the exchanges we've had on these issues before.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are the questions I've got. I see a comment from Gary, which probably relates to some of the financial support issues about the EDM that Robert Halfon, who of course is the newly elected chair of the APPG for the KRI, has laid down, and of course that touches on some of these underlying problems of Baghdad not paying civil servants and things like this, and that is very well worth signing and supporting, and that probably answers part of that financial question. John McDonnell, who says that he has to leave, but his point is, I guess, linking on to Simon's, that what we must do is ensure that we prevent Kurd on Kurd violence and aggression. We must not let people be divided and ruled, because that is the road to disaster. And he welcomes after this meeting any advice and assistance on what we can do to support you to try and de-escalate things so that people can talk, more jaw and less war, as the phrase always goes. And so it's, what can we do to help support that process rather than a more aggressive approach, understanding of course that you can't have people launching attacks from territory that is controlled. What can we do to help bring people together? Microphone, Minister. Microphone
on. Okay. Yeah, I thought I had it on, but never mind.
No, it's fine. We all do it.
Just a very brief few words on the recent ministerial visit. We have been, and my colleague from London, our representative Kara knows very well, and to the ambassador and the consul general here, we have been always complaining that we've had ministers from Finland, from Belgium, from every part of the world, but for the last several years, we didn't have any high-level delegation from UK. And the last KRG delegation, senior KRG delegation led by the Prime Minister, was in May 2014, a month before ISIS war. So we were keep pushing for that, and we were praying for one, we got two. A few days ago, we had these two honorable ministers here. The meetings were extremely good. I think they were very open, very frank, and I think they got very clear and frank answers as well from our leadership. So we appreciate that, and we hope that this kind of interaction will continue on government to government, on parliamentary level, on business to business, as Karwan mentioned. Indeed, we had a very good economical conference recently. So we wish to continue with this kind of relation with the United Kingdom. And as I mentioned earlier, it was in 1991 when Prime Minister Major actually prompted or opted for this safe haven. And next April, we will be celebrating the 30th anniversary of Provide Comfort, which has provided comfort to us. So I think it's an achievement for our Western friends. And next year, hopefully, we can all celebrate this important event, which has probably turned or changed the course of history in this part of the world. Coming to the issue of the protests, indeed, protests have taken place, and these protests are basically, some of them are spontaneous, I must say. Some are being provoked. Again, you know, after all, we live in the Middle East, and sometimes there are outside agendas that are being highlighted or prompted or have been supported and delivered by willingly or knowingly or unknowingly by some locals. But absolutely, the civil servants have every right to receive their salaries, and it's been months that they have not been receiving, and there has been austerity plans. But I think I briefly touched upon the reasons. The fact that we have not been able to provide sufficient funds because Baghdad has not provided budget from 2014. And from the oil sales that we have been able, it has met only a percentage of the salaries. We reached certain agreements with Baghdad, but it hasn't been delivered yet fully. Recently, they have only provided 30% of the required budget, and the rest had to be, there has to be cut downs. Our government in the past and the current government has introduced certain reforms to make cutbacks and to have austerity plans and to do away with subsidies and try to encourage free market economy, entrepreneurship. But of course, some of this requires time. Some of them are short, some are medium term, some are longer term. And we have an excellent team from the United Kingdom helping with the Prime Minister's office with this kind of activities and reforms. We have asked World Bank in the past, we've asked them that they should, in the harshest way, to implement or to introduce their regulations to us for us in order to bring about reforms. But of course, we are still suffering from some of the laws. These laws, Iraq, as you know, after 1958, from monarchy to republic, it was more socialist lenient. The state was the big brother. The state was the mentor from cradle to grave, was the provider. So everybody was relying on public sector employment. Now that culture is being really entrenched in Kurdistan, particularly in the 80s when the villages were destroyed and Saddam put these people in camps and providing them free baskets of food and then making them dependent on states while they're independent. So now we are trying to do away with that culture. It's not going to be easy. I think any reform, even in the Western world, politicians always have difficult to make cutbacks, and they will face demonstrations, and they will face trade unions, and they will face all kinds of resistance. So it's not a difference here, but it is the government's job, it's the government's responsibility to make sure that health, education, security, water, sanitation, all the basic services are provided. And if you compare Kurdistan to the rest of Iraq, I must say we have taken giant leaps with the small percentage of the national budget that has been provided to us from 2005 until 2013 by Baghdad. We have done a great job. Could we have done it better? I'm sure. We have made mistakes, and it's kind of been an unfortunate trial and error. This is why we have asked international community and experts in this field to help us with the reforms. And I think we have been able, and Deputy Prime Minister is responsible for that file, Mr. Qubat Talabani. He has done a great job in the last cabinet and in the current cabinet. But definitely we are in negotiation with Baghdad, and to make sure that we would be able to resolve this situation amicably. The issue of independence by our Scottish friend, aspiration of any Kurd, if you ask him anywhere without any hesitation, of course they want to be independent. Not independent in one part of Iraq or Turkey or Syria, they want a greater Kurdistan in the Middle East. But sometimes, you know, dream is something, and as I said, our leaders have been pragmatic. To dream, it's good. Sometimes dreams do come true, but the leaders are responsible to make sure that dreams don't turn into a nightmare for our people. For Iraqi Kurdistan, the referendum of 2017 is a good example. All of our friends turned their backs on us. So if you don't have anybody supporting this, how can you survive in this neighborhood? And under the very guise and eyes of our American friends, Abrams tanks, which was provided to the Iraqi army, were used by the Iraqi militia forces under the direction of Iranian commanders to crush this movement for referendum by taking Kirkuk, by taking many other areas. So when nobody stopped that, we were left to our own devices. So it was a big test for us to see where international community, where our friends stand when we talk about independence, when we try to at least go in that direction. So we have learned our lessons that we were abandoned, unfortunately. And in this environment, it would be extremely difficult to survive, to declare your independence without any international support, or even one regional country, at least to turn a blind eye to it. So as an aspiration, of course it is there. But as I said, being pragmatic, being realistic, we have to take care the well-being and security and the future of our people, not to be adventurists. Dream is fine, we can dream. And as I said, personally, if you ask me, there will be such a day. But when, how, it's anybody's guess. On the issue of Yazidi units, really it's a case of, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, still there are 80% of the Sinjari community still living in IDP camps. They have not been able to go back for various reasons. So you cannot disregard the view and the voice of 80% who cannot go back to Sinjar because of lack of security, lack of administration, lack of health, lack of education, and all other things. You're talking about 20%, and even that 20% support for this unit is doubtful. What we are trying to say, if we can re-establish law and order, having a totally new mayor, it can be elected, he or she can be elected by the local population once they are back there. But you cannot elect a mayor by 20% of the population and disregarding 80% others. So definitely we are not for any escalation, but it doesn't mean that every armed group comes up and introduce a different agenda. Then you are ending up like the Lebanon of the 70s. Every neighborhood was manned by or controlled by an armed militia. And Iraq, unfortunately, in certain areas, is actually going in that direction. So each one has a different agenda. Some of them may be their own agenda, some of them may be external agendas. So you cannot really merge all these agendas into something that can be national agenda. However, the priority should be security, stability, prosperity, return of IDPs in an honorable way for them to survive and to help them with the post-trauma of losing their loved ones. And that's the priority should be for all of us. How are we going to achieve that? We have to draw up a mechanism. You can help our Western friends, some of the governments, some of the NGOs, and some of the NGOs, they've done a marvelous job by providing psychological assistance to the surviving Yazidi girls who've been traumatized, who've been sold as slaves on the market. We had an office set up by the former Prime Minister. Out of the 6,500 girls and boys and Yazidis that have been kidnapped, almost 3,000 have been rescued through various ways and means. We will continue with that effort. But I think the priority has to be the interest of the people and not the interest of military units there and here and there. The issue of bringing people together and to have unity is always fine. But when you have a common strategy, PKK strategy differs from Iraqi Kurdistan strategy. You cannot draw any parallels between theirs and ours. And unfortunately, the top leaders for 35 years, they've been living in caves in the mountains. They're totally disassociated with what's happening in the modern world. When they were in the mountains, there was the Soviet Empire. The Soviet Empire is gone 30 years ago. So they have to come to reality and deal with the reality and work with the reality. There was a golden opportunity for the peace process in Turkey a few years ago. And I think there still can be such an opportunity. But by hitting and attacking and killing one soldier here and there and coming back and announcing it on their own TV that we did this operation, we are back in media liberated zone, of course that opens the way for Turkey to, and the same with PEJAK, with Iran and other Iranian opposition groups. I mean, I'm not totally loading that on PKK, I'm talking about all armed groups, be it from Iran or be it from Turkey, who are operating from Iraqi Kurdistan. As I said, I mean, it's okay. I believe that what Simon said, it comes deep from his heart. I know him, I've met him, and I think he's an honest, sincere, good friend of the Kurds. But it's easy from thousands of miles away to talk about this kind of unity of the Kurds and sit down and kiss and make up. As I said, if you have a common strategy, it's easy to achieve it. Now we are working with helping, or the Americans primarily, working with PYD and Kurdish National Congress or Council, NKS, to bring them together. It's been months, but the minute that PYD felt they are weak, since last year when Turkey's penetration, immediately they accepted this talk between NKS and themselves. But now they feel they are somewhat stronger, they are moving away from the talks. It's unfortunate. But again, your good advices to us and to them would always go down well, and we are always value your advice, your good advice, because we know it's a friendly one and it's for the benefit of our people and the future of our people. But we also have to understand the reality on the ground.
Perfect. Look, we've taken up an hour of your time now, and I very much appreciate it, and I can see a number of my colleagues are having to leave, but all have been very appreciative of this. And I appreciate your frank and open level of communication on this. I think it is really important. I think we will continue to raise it here with the British government on what they are doing to not only support you, and it's pleasing that the ministerial visit happened, but also support peace in the wider region. And you're right, a lot of this does stem back to those awful 6 PICO lines drawn on the map, and we need to be realistic, but equally we need to ensure that we are able to start supporting autonomy for peoples and self-determination in whatever configuration. We understand states exist, but people need to have the right for self-determination within them and be able to fight for or campaign for that democratically. Look, I'm going to say thank you again. I think that's probably as far as we'll get to. Hopefully we'll see you again in Erbil or wherever very soon. And we are continue to be here if there are issues you wish to raise as well. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for the arrangement, and thanking every single friend and colleague being here. I want to thank you for your continuous support, and hopefully we'll soon be over with this pandemic. And hopefully once the vaccine is out, hopefully the British government will not forget its friends here, maybe by providing some medical support or vaccine or whatever support that can be sent this way. And in near future, we hope that we can meet face to face, and we're grateful for your past support, and we expect you to be a strong pillar of support for our people and our cause, and your advice will always be welcome.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, hopefully things will change slightly with the new US administration. World politics can be reset, and we can have a more positive role in making sure that we don't just follow one view of the world. Before I know we're about to leave, so thank you very much. I did get a message that I should just shout out to Deben, who is the new deputy for the DFR head. Just to say thank you very much for coming along and listening to our concerns as well. I think that's much appreciated, and hopefully we will meet you again in person soon. Okay. Thank you.